Beautiful. The nice lady helping us out. Morning. Welcome everyone to this 7th session of Global Chats. We have a phenomenal guest for you today in Simon Curran. I want to get him to intro himself in just a second. And as always, all you need for this is a cup of coffee, tea, or water if you're looking after your health and well-being, your own mental thinking, and a pen, which is the best form of memory that I find if you capture notes as you go through. Myself and my co-host Corey will be leading today's session, which will be a mix of interactive quick-fire questions with Simon, some wider conversations and mentee poll for yourself to connect and engage, as well as deep dive and Q&A to the audience. So as we go through, feel free to capture questions that you've got for Simon that you'd love to explore around engaging and high performance, as well as many other topics that will come up on our varied journey today. So Corey, why don't you say hi to the team and then tag in Simon and we'll get going.
Hi, everyone. Great to see everyone today. Super excited about this time together with Simon. I'm Mark's counterpart in the Americas. I'm Chief Leadership Officer. Simon, would love to have you introduce yourself.
Well, kia ora e te whānau. Morning in New Zealand. My name's Simon Curran. I'm the Chief Executive Founder of an organisation in New Zealand called Bastion Shine. I'm also the Head Performance Coach of something called the All Blacks Performance Labs, which I'll get into in more detail shortly. Love to see you all.
Beautiful. And we'll test your technological dexterity now, team, with a sharing of a mentee poll. For those new to it, it's pretty easy guidance. You can scan the QR code or do some two-finger typing and put the www address in with the mentee reference, and I'll share that on the screen so that you can get rocking and rolling. So give me just 1 second. Here we go. Slow fingers. Here we are. Ding, ding, and present mode. There you go. Should be up on your screens now, ready for you to QR barcode scan. Once you scan, it will just give you a little thumbs up icon so you can connect in. It knows that you're there. And then when I move the screen to the next slide, give you a chance to say where you're dialing in from today, so we get a sense of the mix and the variety of the audience. So where's home for you? With a couple of us already popped in where we're dialing in from, feel free to have a crack for the rest of us as the blobs start assimilating across the slide. Awesome. We'll give people a chance to catch up with that. I'll move back to the main screen and the rapid fire. There'll be a chance to give inputs around your own insights for you and your organization as we keep going, but I'll stop share for now and back over to you, Corey.
Wonderful. So one of our favorite things to do in these global chats is really get to know our guest. And so Simon, going to ask you some rapid fire questions and would love just to get to know you better with some quick answers. So first question is, what do you love best about your work?
I get to live my purpose every day of helping unleash the potential in others.
If you weren't doing this, what would you be doing?
At the moment, I'd be dropping my daughter at a speech competition. But I know metaphorically you don't mean right now, but I would actually be a teacher. That'd be my ideal way to spend the day.
What age?
I would 15, 16, or 17. Graduating out of high school would be my gig.
Lovely. What about, share something with us not on your resume.
I'm claustrophobic. I used to battle sleeping in tents, so I would have to stick my head outside a tent and leave my body inside the tent. And I had a reoccurring dream about being stuck in an elevator, in an air conditioning shaft. It's not the usual go-to, but I've worked through that. I've left that behind now.
Oh,
that's
great.
Amazing. And your hair, like me, it must be putting your head outside the tent that rubbed it off over time, mate.
Horrendous.
All right. What about a nickname you were known by and where it originated?
Peaches, which is,
Story?
yeah, long story, but not a naughty story. It just takes a long time to get to. But the meaning expanded over time. But Peaches was my nickname for a period.
Okay. Given to you by who?
My rugby team.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. What about your newest go-to app on your phone?
I can tell you that it's called Miranda, and it's an app that helps very quickly calibrate time zones around the world. So you can just, the interface is elegant. I can work out what time it is in Paris, New York, Sydney, New Zealand all at once. So a great help.
I need that, and I'm going to be downloading that right after this call.
Mm-hmm.
What about something you're reading or listening to right now?
I'm rereading Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'm a visitor of Dr. Mike Gervais' Finding Mastery, which is a podcast series. It's a go-to podcast recently.
Final fire question. What motivates you to get out of bed in the morning?
I have a non-negotiable about winning the mornings. So I have a set of rituals I do every morning, and I know I perform at my best if I start my day at my best. So I'm competitive, so that gets me going.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks for indulging us in those questions, Simon. So now let's get more into the topic and why we're so excited to have you with us. So we've all seen the quieting and level of disenfranchisement then after the pandemic, hybrid work, out new ways of work, the pace of change. So we're really excited to have you with us. Your work is centered on identifying signs of yourself in the people around you, using rituals to build a championship team rather than a team of champions, and how to lift your team's performance. So here's the question. That language around a championship team versus a team of champions, what's the difference?
That's a great question. We became fixated by the question, actually, and spent almost 9 years trying to work out the difference. Because on a PowerPoint slide, you'd argue it's just the order of words, team of champions versus a championship team. But as you can imagine, these things are worlds apart. And so we went to where we thought we would find the answer, which boardroom, and predominantly in the US. They were the fastest scaling, most valuable companies on earth. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Apple, yada, yada, yada. And what we thought would answer is that we asked them the question, how do you build a championship team? And what we thought would happen is they would say, look, we're really good at these things, but you should study that company because they're good at these things. And it would become like a mutual appreciation society. But actually what happened is they didn't reference each other once. Not because they weren't allowed to, just frankly for them, there was a more interesting point of reference. And the environment they kept sending us to, they would say, if you want to study how to build a championship team, study who we study, that's surgical teams. And we said, what? Why a surgical team? And they said, well, when you think about it, when a child's on an operating theater and the surgeon opens that child's chest up and that child starts bleeding out, in that moment, that's the personification of high performance. Because everyone knows the goal and everyone knows their role, knows the rules by how they play their role, and it comes together and lives are saved. And that started a intrepid journey. We went from surgical suites to Formula One pit lanes to symphony orchestras, and we ended back up in Aotearoa, New Zealand, studying the All Blacks, and not specifically the All Blacks, the Black Ferns. We looked at 7s, 15s, Māori. And through that kind of bar from Star Wars journey of really disparate environments, we got to what we think is the beat, 3 specific words, which are at the heart of high-performing teams, regardless of environment, regardless of terrain. And the 3 words are me, we, and go. We have a thing about keeping things Sesame Street simple, and that's about as simple as we can get it, me, we, and go. And the reason for that is that most teams spend most of their time going. And gosh, do we go. We go, and we have stand-ups, sit-downs, OKRs, retros, yada, yada, yada. And at a certain point, usually what happens in these high-go environments is the leader says, time out, we should do an offsite. And so we stumble offsite, and the leader says we're here, but we need to be here, and we hand out post-it notes because that's collaborative. And at the end of the session, we have a couple of drinks here because that's collaborative. But then we go again. And that's just the beat. What we found is that really good teams start a beat earlier. They started the we. And the we isn't, can you remember our values? The we is, what are our standards? And what are our rituals? And what are our expectations of each other? How do we go on punctuality? How do we go on managing difficult conversations? How do we go on personal ownership? Almost like scaffolding, the kind of the sense of you get that stuff right, you can go after bigger things. And that is good. But the problem is I could be in this good team and I could know this chants and the rituals and do it out loud, but in my head be going, is this the moment that Corey works out that I'm full of rubbish, or is that later on? What we now know is the imposter syndrome, which is as real in this room now as it is in every room that we engage with. So we found that the greatest teams, the championship teams, start their work and their discussions at a me level. And they get people thinking about how they think. When under pressure, do you fight, flight? Are you a victim or a bully? But more specifically, why? And we had a beautiful analogy given to us recently, like a petri dish in science. Back in the day, we learned that if you put a healthy cell and a second healthy cell into a petri dish, it multiplies to create a healthy culture. But conversely, a healthy cell and an unhealthy cell, not by what someone eats or drinks, but how they think, we will be polite, but we will pollute that culture. And then at the least convenient moment, we'll work out we didn't have the performance culture that we thought that we had. And so that's a long way of answering a simple question, that championship teams are greater than the sum of their parts. Championship teams focus on the me before the we before they go. And they have an ultimate currency of accountability.
Simon, that's super thought-provoking. There's a lot I want to get into with that. What I'd love to do is hand off to Mark right now to pulse the audience on some thoughts around topics you just raised, and then we're going to get into more detail about what you just shared.
Okay, great.
Beautiful. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Simon. So Menti poll up and going, and a few more questions to get us thinking and engaging. So let me just wake up the slide. Should be ready for the temperature around here. A couple of us have filled this out, but have a go for yourself. What's your sense of how engaged the people in your organization are, your own engagement, and how would you rate your own team's performance based on what performance means to you and the me, we, go reflection that Simon was sharing there? Cool. In a moment, Simon will flick to the next slide, and then we'll have a chance to move between both as a bit of a commentary and reflect back based on what you're seeing. So I'll pop us to the next slide, which is around how do we reward or the culture in the organization rewards at an individual level, a team performance level, a combination, or it doesn't really reward performance at all. It's like, you just show up, well done. As it's building out. If we move back to the previous slide, then Corey, Simon, reflections on what you're seeing, any additional thoughts or provocations you want to throw into the mix at this point?
Well, what's interesting for me as a first glance is your audience are remarkable outliers as it relates to a population. And the reason for saying that is you've got 3.5 out of, is it a 5-point metric, I guess, here?
Yeah.
Saying that employees in an organization are fully engaged. So Gallup came out end of last year and said 85% of employees are either unengaged or actively disengaged. So we have an outlier audience here, which is either remarkable or inaccurate. And I don't say any judgment off the back of that. I just make that as an observation. And my own engagement is fully engaged. One of the questions we ask when we're in a team setting, any team setting, be it a team preparing for the Olympics or a fast scaling technology business on a way to its IPO or et cetera, we'll ask people sitting in a room, show us by way of fingers, how close to your full potential are you? 10 fingers up as I'm playing at the very edge of what I'm capable of. 1 finger up and come and check your heartbeat, make sure everything's okay. But in between that, everything else is fair game. And the rolling average that we get, regardless of country, is somewhere between a 6 and a 7. Now, I know there's a difference between engagement and access to full potential, but I think actually one's a lagging indicator of the other. If someone is genuinely fully engaged, my thesis is they're playing close to what they're fully capable of. So again, this audience might be one that are genuinely the outliers as it relates to accessing full potential and engagement versus most audiences. But it might be, what is our definition of engagement? And that might be, no, I show up and I've got a positive attitude, which is slightly different from the working definition that I would have, or what we go looking for as we probe engagement levels in an organization.
Love it. Thank you. And the next slide was a bit more around what gets rewarded. And I'm intrigued as to how that plays out in those different teams that you engage with. But again, observations, provocations, what do you recognize here, Simon?
Well, again, I'm always curious as to when we use the word reward, what do we mean by reward? Do we mean fiscal? Do we mean promotion? Or it's most simple, do we mean feedback and recognition? So when we look at engagement, what we go looking for is three particular ingredients in a particular order. We draw it as a triangle. And this particular triangle, when I'm coaching leadership teams, is if there was one model I'd be using on a daily basis or an hourly basis, it would be this particular triangle as a set of ingredients. And the first thing we go looking for is connection, then clarity, and then feedback and recognition. We think this is a quick way to hack the performance of any team and any leader of a team. And the reason for those 3 ingredients and the reason for that particular order is, again, Gallup, I think 6 weeks ago, came out and said that engagement scores around the world are at an all-time low of the last decade, regardless of geography, category, and so forth. And they pinned it down to saying there's an implicit lack of clarity and a real deficit of feedback and recognition going on within teams at the moment. So the reason we use the triangle in that order is if a leader jumps in to provide clarity without having first connected a room or a team, that's not so much clarity as it is instruction. I want you to do this. I'm going to tell you what we stand for. And after that, I'll tell you what to do next. So connection for us is always the bedrock by which we build high-performing teams. In an all-black environment, you'll hear them say, we connect before we correct, baking that into a team engagement. If you give feedback and recognition without giving clarity, actually what that creates is confusion. Because on Monday, I'm a rock star, and on Thursday, now I'm scared of being dropped because we didn't give them the scaffolding of clarity. And so my sense is actually what people are craving when we talk about rewards is on an annual basis. It'd be good to know how my performance measure is going, but I'm more interested in knowing on a more regular cadence, daily, hourly, like how am I tracking? Where am I at? And so in the clarity piece, that's where we really drill into Well, what is the North Star of the organization? What's the role of the team? What's the role that I play? How am I performing within that? And then ensuring that we have a reward culture premised on gratitude, on taking time to acknowledge one another. Principally because I think as it relates to rewards, it's easier to get people to play out of their skin when they're comfortable of the skin that they're in. And in the absence of that, then we crave monetary or peripheral reward systems as opposed to just an inherent feeling of strength.
Wow. Back to you, Corey. Otherwise, I'm going to take it all over the place.
Yeah, happy to. So, Simon, that the data from Gallup is real. It's making the news about the level of disengagement. So here's the question. What signs should we be looking for, either to recognize our own disengagement or disengagement of our team?
Well, I sort of, one of the mantras that we walk by is, or two, the standard you walk by is the standard that you accept. That's number one. And number two is you can't solve what you can't see. So I would certainly, in the teams that I'm working with most, it's not so much what are the signs, because we make it visceral and public. It's not, you don't have to read the tea leaves. Here we are, team, out of 10. How close to our potential are we? Ready? Go. Or as a momentum index, we just finished a discussion. Ready? Out of 5, where do you think we're at? Boom, I've got a 5 up. Mark's got a 1 up. We've got a disconnect. Well, you think you're at a 10. I think you're tracking at a 4. We've got a disconnect. And I think part of the issue is words like engagement become like fog that just sort of drifts in and out of a room and no one's really sure where we're at. And then we rely on topics or moments like culture surveys to get a dipstick, as opposed to let's have a discussion on where you're at. So the Black Ferns in New Zealand is our women's 7 and 15 rugby side. And one of the gifts I learned from them is how they do one-on-ones. Now, on an organization context, when we hear the word one-on-one, people's backs stiffened up. It's like it's a thing and there could be judgment. But this is a team that do a one-on-one on a weekly, if not a daily basis. And they do it by asking 4 questions, 4 very simple questions. How are you? No, how are you really? Let's just get past the nonsense. How are we? And then what's one thing that I can do to help you with your role? Now, you might not get past question 2, but you did not need to get past question 2 because someone's carrying more load than they're feeling capable of carrying. I think what we end up doing in organizations is rely on posh systems and outdated ways of working to try and crack, do we have a disengagement issue here or not? Instead of saying, do we have a disengagement issue here? How are you tracking? Where are you at? And so if a leader walks into a room, like we're told a comedian thinks that they've got between 10 to 15 seconds to engage an audience before they lose them. My sense watching leaders is the first 5 minutes of every meeting they have, that's their moment to get people out of their head and into their heart. But what happens most leaders in most meeting rooms is they walk into a room in their head, slightly late, they rattle through an agenda in their head, they finish the meeting late, and people leave not knowing what we talked about or what happens next. And that happens on Tuesday, it happens in July, and it happens at the end of the quarter, and it happens at the end. And yet 30 centimeters away from their head is their heart. And we don't engage that very often. And then we end up having conversations. And no, that's my home self, not my work self. And I've yet to meet a high-performing team or high performer that has these split personalities, like they're engaged at home, but they're not engaged at work. And so we drive a conversation with teams on this idea of what would need to be true for you to have your best year yet. And the definition is 20% better personally and professionally than any year you've ever had before. Presupposes for most of us there's a trade-off. Like, I'll be great at work, but I'm going to compromise time with the kids. Or I'm going to spend more family time, but that's coming at it. But what if it didn't? Like, what if you could burst that algorithm? And we'll get them to do an eyes shut exercise and actually answer the question. Imagine you today, the 31st of August, 2024. Imagine you sitting in a place where you are having just completed your best year yet, 20% better both ways. And we get them to see what they would see, feel what they would feel, hear what they would hear, as if they've just finished their best year yet. And with music on and eyes shut, we get them to feel that. And then we ask them questions like, from there, what did you say yes to more often? What did you say no to more often? Who did you spend more time with, and what did they give you? Who did you spend less time with, and what was the gift you got? But then a really, really important question: who benefits the most when you are at your best? The clue being they're probably not working with you. And what gift did you give them? And that question becomes leverage, because many of us have intentions to do a whole lot of things and we never get down to doing it. But when someone writes the name and they can visualize that person and they know what they gave them when they're at their best, well, that's a reason for burning the boats and getting after it. And that's again a way of then saying, okay, give me now one word to compare you at your very best, your best year yet. So then they get to a word, and then we bring them out of it and say, okay, that word, how close to that word are you today? Wow, I'm not. Okay, we've just defined disengagement. Now that's now our map. I've got a word where I am today. I've got a word where I am at my best year yet. Let's now plot the journey to get after that. And that will reframe disengagement. No, like I was turning up, but I'm a long way from my potential. Okay, great. No judgment to that. Let's now chase your potential. And that for us is what a culture of high performance is about. Create a gap from where they are to where they could be, bridge the gap. Create a new gap, bridge the gap. And my personal sense of leadership is having the altitude to help someone understand that there's a gap between where they are and they could be, with no judgment to that. And sometimes that's about believing in that individual more than that individual believes in themselves. To create a gap, then close it. Create it, then close it.
Simon, what really stood out to me about what you just said was just empathy. Empathy for what people are going through, where they are. And I noticed 3 times you said, no judgment in that. What role does empathy play in high performance teams and level of engagement?
I think it's like oxygen for high performers. But I would say the first version of empathy is at a me level before it's at a we level. Empathetically understanding, let me swap that word out slightly for self-awareness. Every high performer that we work with, coach and learn from has a heightened level of self-awareness, which is not judgment. It's not a critical eye necessarily, but it's knowing that it's getting a sense of how am I showing up at my best in order to encourage them to be at their best. High performers don't blame the machine. They're not victims to it. They're not caught up in there's no us, there's not so much an us and them rhetoric. It's they own the responsibility to be logging off early, to drop Netflix, to make sure they sleep, to have performance rituals so they know. And then as it relates to the we, this I think is some of the power of purpose. Like there's a sense, a great expression I learned from Gilbert Enoka within the All Blacks is aspirations get you going, but a deep sense of purpose keeps you going. And so when a group of people come together and they know why they're here and they know how they contribute to it, you can have each other's backs with that, because it's less about you did this and I'm doing this. It's no, we are traveling to a place together. Once again, that's why rituals like we connect before we correct. We take time to understand that, like we'll often talk about belonging within the construct of empathy. And in a high performing environment, belonging has a very specific definition. And the way that we describe it is accepted for who you are so that you can be expected to perform at your best. Now, those two bits of that sentence are handcuffed together. Accepted for who you are with no standards. Well, that's like a country club. That's a collegiately underperforming group of people, but it's lovely. That's not high performance. Expecting people to be at their best without accepting them for who they are, well, that's a recipe for burning them out. But when you have both, and again, back to that triangle, you connect them, then you provide clarity. Where are we going? What's our role? What's our priorities? What role do you be? Now we feel good. And then we continue to reward them through feedback and recognition. Well, then it becomes like a flywheel of performance.
All right, Mark, what are you curious about?
Super potent. And you were talking earlier, Simon, about the shift from mentally not quite there and present from head to heart. And if we've got deep empathy, I'm sure as we bring the whole of ourselves to whatever we're engaging with purposefully, there's aspects of our lives that impact that. So given we've all at certain times experienced traumatic events in our lives, and sometimes that can flip into a really negative way of showing up, how have you experienced trauma and worked with teams with trauma and turned it into post-traumatic growth rather than PTSD and all the other aspects that come from it?
It's a dear topic to me, because it was the lightning rod. Trauma was the lightning rod to change what I was doing and how I was doing it. And without going into all the detail on it, we had a medical issue with one of our daughters, and that the gift in hindsight was it enabled us to move from one day I should to now I'm going to. And someone at the time said to us, what if this is not happening to you, it's happening for you? Which was, in hindsight, a profound comment. It didn't land at that time because of like, we were dealing with a life and death situation. But we sat in as our daughter was recovering, we sat in a physician's room, and a nurse and doctor drew on a whiteboard a diagram that completely rewired our life. And to describe that diagram, she said that most of our lives, wonderfully, are a reasonably flat and predictable line. We have little ups and downs within it, but wonderfully, it's predictably flat. And what was interesting is, in normal times, we crave extraordinary things, but in times of crisis, you just want ordinary back. So her point was, this is a good thing. But what happens for some people is you have this, and she drew a big red line, cut it in half. She said this line for some is the loss of a loved one, or restructuring of a job, or a diagnosis, or perhaps for the world, COVID. Like it shatters what used to be normal. And she said that what happens, unfortunately, and she said to us, you're going to hear a lot now about a thing called post-traumatic stress. And she drew a spiral down. She said, it's true, there's literature to back it up. But the issue, the tragedy is not post-traumatic stress. The tragedy is the opposite is also possible. And she drew a spiral up. She said, that's called post-traumatic growth. But the real issue is not enough people are aware of it. And that the journey is identical. Normal, shatter, most people spiral down, but you can fight your way back up. But it is a fight. For every one step down, you have to fight 4 or 5 steps up. But that gives you a chance to reinvent yourself. And she said to us, it's binary. You're not a little bit of either. You're either down or you're up. But she said there's a one-word difference, which is the catalyst to whether you're going down or up. And this one word will rewire you. And she said the word is curiosity. She said to us, the problem for your daughter is the fact you now as parents, you think you're the victim, not your daughter. And you will now parent like a victim. But see, a victim needs a bully. No bully, no victim. So you're now going to collect evidence of why life's really unfair for you, and you'll find it, because if you go looking for evidence of unfairness, you will find it. But you will be stuck in this rot and you will spiral down. The reason curiosity is the word is you have to take off victim goggles and put on a more curious mindset and find something to rebirth yourself out of here. And so we picked the brain and how the brain works, and that took us into moving into the world of high performance coaching. And so what trauma does, our life purpose now is to help people go through change without requiring trauma. Because the gift from trauma is you say, okay, this time now it's different. Now we start again. Or you spiral down. And I don't think teams spend enough time trying to really diagnose curiously what led to an issue, small issue or big issue. We just do what we've always done and collect evidence as to why we think it's someone else's fault, as opposed to saying, let's stop the boat now. What led us to this position? How do we use trauma to get to a higher level of performance? Again, another All Black analogy, they have a thing they call MIA in the All Blacks, which is like a pre-mortem or a post-mortem. And MIA stands for, what are we missing? What are we ignoring? Or what are we incorrectly assuming? Because one of those things must be true. And to do that either after traumatic events or as a preemptive move, as a pre-mortem, we might say, to avoid traumatic moves, again, trauma, big T or little t, helps us get ahead of the game. So I hunt trauma because I think it's a powerful oxygen to play with, to try and get people out of post-traumatic stress, recognizing that post-traumatic growth is available to all of us.
That's amazing. And so akin to one of our previous guests, Nick Petrie, who had the trauma of bowel cancer that had him reframe his life to create more impact purposely. So just seeing some parallels there. Back over to you, Corey. Thank you for sharing.
Just to extend this before, Corey, to you. When we run sessions in rooms, or let's take a session like this, one of the questions I'll often ask in a room is, let's just do a year, count up how many years of experience have we had in, if it's within Air New Zealand, aviation. Okay, 1,000 years. Okay, right. What that tells us is if the challenges in aviation or retail, or we're going to crack that. But out of 10, how close to our potential are we? Okay, now the average is 6. We've got 1,000 years of experience, but we're traveling as 6s. Probably not out of 10. 10's just how good you think you could be, not actually how good you really could be. So now it might be 6 out of 12, which means 1,000 years of experience, and we're only accessing half of what we're capable of. But what usually happens now is people write notes in notebooks that they never see again. I'm not sure what happens to those notebooks, but we sit in conferences, we write it down, and 3 weeks later, it's all out of our head. And so the provocation is, what would need to be different for this now to be different? Like the note that you're writing is just not a, that was interesting. It's a catalyst to do things differently. And sadly, the answer to that for most people is trauma. If I went through a traumatic event, well, now I would really start doing some of this stuff. Otherwise, I'm just writing notes. So hence the provocation, what would it take to burn the boats to make this time different? And sometimes that's why the question on who benefits most when you're at your best. Because often people like those that are gathered in this room spend a lot of time putting oxygen on other people without putting oxygen on ourselves. Because we have a servant leadership mindset, which is powerful, but on an airline, we're told in the case of turbulence, oxygen masks will drop from them. Put it on yourself first before you put it on other people. And so those in the leadership development or personal development space that are traveling at 6s and 7s, what are we waiting for? Don't let it be trauma, because it doesn't need to be trauma. Sorry, Corey, back to you.
No, Simon, that was excellent. You triggered something for me in, what does it take for people to actually take an insight and turn it into action? I heard a powerful set of coaching questions the other day along this line. So the one was, what did you learn? What's possible if you embrace this learning? And then here was the powerful part that caught my attention. What are the consequences if you don't? What are the consequences if you don't take action on that insight you just had?
Well, let me just play off the back of that. When it comes to consequences, I think there's a really powerful construct we use with consequences. There's a marked difference between intentions and commitments. I intend to do all sorts of different things, but I don't do them. But if I commit to doing it, either it's a commitment as part of a team charter, like this time it's different, and I commit to it and we all sign that document, move it from the ethereal to an artifact. That's a powerful mechanism to move at the we level. But at a me level, this is where I think consequences are really interesting, because Corey, if I promise you something, I'm going to do it. But I promise myself things all the time and don't do it. And so we learned this from a group called the Handel Group, this concept of promises and consequences, which is declaring a promise, but also declaring a consequence as a means of holding ourselves accountable. So I'll give you an example. I have a promise with my daughters that I don't want to be a dad that raises his voice. I don't want to be their dad, but because I'm human, sometimes I'm that dad. And so my promise to them is, I don't want to do that. And if I do raise my voice at you, I'll drop and do 10 press-ups wherever we are. And the reason I'm going to do that is I've got to have some friction. I've got to have not just, oh, well, next time. Saying sorry isn't enough. And what I'm trying to do is leash a trait. That's a passive-aggressive trait that I get from generation after generation after generation. And so leashing traits, we use promises and consequences to do that. And so what happens is a week ago, I go into my daughter's bathroom and there's toothpaste everywhere. Ah, come on. And then my 11-year-old points to the ground and stands over me going, 6, 7. And when I get up, I'm laughing and she's laughing. And the gift is that she knows what I'm doing because I don't want to be that guy. And I've got an accountability system now with an 11-year-old that says, help me get better. And that's the power of making consequences a currency, not just like an intention word that, oh, well, maybe one day I will. No, collapse the distance between something that's not consistent with the standard and the consequence you pay to tidy it up. But then don't carry it around. And often what we do is we have intentions and we say, I'm going to do that at some stage. And now I haven't done it. Now I'm not a good person. And then I spiral down again. We've got too many open tabs in our mind. And that's why you made the reference to the without judgment. We use this sort of construct we learned this from IDEO, the great design agency, saying that treat it like an archaeologist at a dig. Because an archaeologist at a dig doesn't arrive with bulldozers and start throwing dirt. They just get a brush and they start moving dirt curiously. And look at that, it's Tyrannosaurus Rex. By a curious lens, not a judging lens. And too often we take a judging lens, which is like a bulldozer throwing dirt, as opposed to going, sometimes it's what we crave the most that we actually need to give the most. And so the curious lens, when I feel like I just want Mark to give me more attention. Okay, how much attention am I giving Mark? And it's by asking those sorts of looping questions that then helps us get to the bottom of things really.
It gets back to the me in the triangle.
Always, always, always starts with the individual. And when you hear a team member create an us and them narrative, or point to what everyone else is not doing, I would bring them back to just help me, remind me, what actually are you doing in this formula? Like, we disassociate responsibility, but not in high-performing teams. It starts at a me level.
Thank you, Simon. Mark, where do you want to go next?
I reckon a bit of audience engagement, just some thinking via the mentee, and then we'll loop back and see what gets triggered again in yourself and Simon. So if I do a little screen share, bear with me. I went back to one of the earlier slides just so people could, moving my Zoom controls. Here we go. So would love to hear from our own lived experience. We've heard a number of triangles, reference points, the me, we, us, and other aspects. But from your own lived experience, how do we lift our team's performance? Capture in the mentee poll, what are some of the things that you've found really lift and shift either teams that you've been part of or teams that you've led? It will take them a little while to type this in. And just as people are popping in their responses, also just to be mindful after this little section, if there's any questions, provocations you'd like to provide to Simon, then feel free to get those ready to share via the chat, or unmute yourself and share verbally with Simon so he can answer them for us. So with you, Corey and Simon, reflections, builds, things that resonate, what are you seeing here that provokes your own thinking and reflection back to the audience?
Well, what jumps for me is I think you could take the word map here and you could use the bento box, if you will, of connection, clarity, and feedback and recognition. And I think most of these will find a home at one of these layers. If you take purpose, clear, aligned on clear goals, passion for the cause, these are all examples of, for me, fitting in a clarity box. Appreciation, backing people, listening, that's an example of feedback and recognition. The bit that I would continue to, and I think in this time, in this moment that we're in, this kind of metaphorical and literal for some geographies, winter, I would double down on the connection layer. I just think in our speed to get to results, we're stepping over the connection layer. And what happens is, you know, when individuals are tired, stressed, or strained, we get colorblind to success. Like, we miss it. We concentrate on what we haven't done rather than on what we have done. And my sense is the most cost-effective team-building exercise is simply gratitude. So in that, I mentioned before, the first 5 minutes of a meeting, we'll get leaders working on a playbook that says, how do you own that first 5 minutes to connect before we correct? Now, for some, that will do we're going to do a quick round of gratitudes. Mark, you're going to start and you're going to throw a gratitude to whoever you want to, and they're going to bounce it from there. So there's an easy one. We might do another one called recent wins. Okay, everyone's got post-it notes. As many examples of recent wins that this team's had in the last week, month, whatever that period is, go. And people are furiously writing notes, and we have a big flip chart. And we're okay, one at a time. Let's go. One from you, Mark. One from you, Corey. One from you, John. We loop. But then what's powerful is then to ask the question, what did you just see? What did you just hear? And inevitably what that group will say is, wow, we've done a lot. Some's big, some small, some internal, some short-term, long. Wow. And then the point of the room can be, there's a muscle that we've got to keep building here, which is recognizing progress. Another, draw a name out of a hat. I draw Mark. Okay, I've got 3 questions to answer. What's a recent win you've done, Mark? What's a gift you bring this room? And what's something I've learned from you? And then we go around the room and Corey says whoever she got. And then at the end, the powerful question is, what did you just hear? And the room will reflect back and go, we've got some amazing individuals in this room. We really care for one another. Now, if you ask the question, how close to the potential of are we as a team? After doing those exercises, you usually get a higher mark because people feel settled and safe. And when they feel settled and safe, then we flood the body we get dopamine going because of achievement. We get oxytocin as a love drug, and then we get endorphins. It's a chemical storm, and endorphins will mask pain, so people feel like they belong there. We just skip over that stuff, though, when we hit an agenda. And if connection is clear, that's like the kryptonite for the clarity and the feedback and recognition that's set above it.
Thanks, Simon. What we'd love to do now is open it up to the audience. We have time for 1 or 2 questions from you. What are you curious about, and what would you love to ask Simon?
Would you be more
yeah. Jay started with one.
Yeah, no problem, Jay. So I've got 3 ingredients that I need to hit to be at my best. I need to move my body, I need to calm my mind, and I need to connect with my family. If I do those 3 things, and for me, a particular order, then I can play out of my skin. And so moving my body is I'll do some high intensity training for usually half an hour, or a shorter amount of time, but I always do a hot cold. So I'm into it's not an ice bath, it's just a very cold pool. And if I'm away somewhere, shower. So I put my body under some degree of tension. I will do things like I will journal or calm my mind. And I do that specifically to design the day ahead. To be, and how do I need to show up, and what does my energy need to be like for the different interactions I've got in my calendar. And then I'll have some form of connection with my family. That might be eating with them, that might be spending love time with my wife, that whatever it might be, loving time. And so if I've got those three ingredients and I do them, I time chunk them, then my transit time to work isn't so much just about getting to work, and then I'm starting to tune my mind in for what I need to do. And when I'm at my best, which isn't all, but that's a template. So if I have to take an early flight, my template just goes earlier. It's not something that I drop because of earlier, which might mean I go to bed earlier. And then I'll do it at the end of the day. I'll just do a review on how I tracked. That's my win in the mornings.
Thanks, Jay. Another question from the audience.
In the absence of a question, I'm keen to hear some of the parallels, just that other thing we reflected on as prep for today, Simon, between the world of peak performance, athletes, Olympians, etc., All Blacks, Black Ferns, and then the corporate world. What are the parallels and what are the differences between those two environments for performance from your experience?
Great. I love this question. What happens when we do our All Blacks performance labs, so the part of our journey of helping people go through change without trauma, the reason we set up with New Zealand Rugby what we now call All Blacks performance labs, and it's predicated on the figure 8. The idea of it is work with world-leading teams, organizations, coach and learn from them, but to take that playbook back into grassroots, Aotearoa New Zealand specifically, to access to mindset tools and performance tools that otherwise they won't get access to. There's like a terrible irony of those that need it the most get it the least. And so that's what drives us. And so when we run sessions, there's usually a point in a session where someone will put their hand up and say, oh, this is all good and well, but of course an athlete only plays for 80 minutes and I'm working 40 hours, 50 hours a week. So it's not really the same, is it? Presupposes these worlds are completely diametrically opposed. Our belief is that they're actually far closer than we might think. And so athlete only plays for 80 minutes a week on Saturday. Well, my way of unpacking that is, okay, so tell me about yesterday in your day job. How much of it were you genuinely playing versus practicing? Like you were on, like it was the crucible moment yesterday. And what most people then reflect on is, wow, it was just Wednesday. It was a business as usual day. Okay, well, in an athlete's world, that's like practice. But here's the difference. At the end of practice, the coach has got all their data. How much they slept, how much they ate, how much they moved. They watched every interaction. So they can let them know, hey, if you practice like that ongoing, there's going to be a performance issue here. Not many executives would like forensic performance review done on Tuesdays. But that's what happens in the world of an athlete. But also in an athlete's world, in some organizations, we hear this, oh no, we're still forming, norming, and storming, or whatever that thing is, which suggests we're not performing at the level we need because we haven't been together for long enough. In a sports team, lose 5 on a row, and usually the coach is on their way out, or the media is saying that they should have gone. And if shortly after the coach will be the players. High-performing athletes don't get time to storm, form, norm. They have to. And in those environments, they move from playing against each other, trialing against each other, forming as one team and then competing against each other for the starting journey, and that might happen in the space of a month. Whereas in organizations, we're still working out where lanyards are. So I think they're far closer than we might think. The profound difference, I think, is the rituals and regimes that athletes do to optimize performance as compared to the rinse and repeat mentality that most executives have. We do what we did last week, this week, or today like yesterday, just different people in different rooms. So that's my short version of what becomes an hour breakout discussion on how similar or different they are.
It's beautiful. I'm mindful a couple of questions have come in. We'll need to loop back to those after, just in order to close and be respectful of our time. We've only got 3 minutes left. So I'm going to pop a couple of references in the chat just to some things coming up as announcements. And then I think, Corey, you've got one closeout question for Simon to wrap us up. So what's coming up? We've got the burnout assessment opportunity for people. This is the research Nick Petrie's done into how do you grow, perform, and manage or litigate against burnout and that post-traumatic growth. So that's something that we're trialing. So an opportunity to access that. We've got our next speaker joining us in a couple of months' time. That's Lane Greer. So an opportunity to connect in on that one. And also the future of leadership development coming up both in San Fran and Auckland. So the links are in the chat. I'll zip it, hand to you, Corey, for the final question so we can be on time.
Wonderful. One more rapid fire question for you, Simon, and it's this. We'd love to leave this global chats with an intention. What advice, quote, or motto would you put on a billboard?
Mine would be, I've stolen it from someone else, but it would be hand up, not hand out. I think it's on each of us to recognize that we play an outsized role, pulling people up, clearing the mist from others, rather than putting our hand out and asking for someone else to do it for us. Taking the personal responsibility as opposed to a victim mindset, chasing post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress, chasing commitments rather than intentions, being an author, not a reporter. And for me, they roll up to a mantra of hand up, pulling people up, as opposed to putting my hand out to ask for something more.
Phenomenal. Thanks very much, Simon. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
Amazing.
We'll see you next time.
Exceptional. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, audience. Enjoy your day. Go make a difference. Remember, hand up, not hand out. Go forth and be accountable. Have a great session and a great week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.